Hi there, and welcome back to the Badger with me, the Badger guy. Today I'm going to be going through a little bit about DNS. I won't get into too much detail, but I just want to show some of the features inside Unity on what you can do with static DNS records and if you have a domain controller or not. So let's take a look. So here we have Stellenbosch University as our demo site. Again, this isn't a real place. And if we go to our LAN page, you'll see here you have your site settings and your static DNS records. For instance, if I had a web server on site and it's not a domain that exists in the public space, and I just needed to resolve DNS to a local server, what I can do is go and edit these records. So for example, if I go to the basics of DNS quickly and we say we do an NS lookup of Google. My PC, this is my local router. My PC will use my local Badjr as the local DNS server. It will do a lookup of this host name on my local DNS server and it will return the IP address. Because Google does not exist in my local domain, the Badjr recognizes that that domain doesn't exist locally and then forwards that DNS request out to the next DNS server that my Badjr uses. So for example, the DNS servers that my Badjr is using is Google's. And if I do a DNS request to the Badjr that it doesn't know about, if it doesn't know about that domain name that I'm looking at, it will forward it on to Google's DNS servers. And then it will return the IP address with whatever that DNS server responds with. If I, for example, do an NS lookup of noodle.com, but I don't want to use the Badjr as the DNS server when I do the lookup, I can bypass that by doing an NS lookup with the domain name I'm looking up and then the specific DNS server that I want to use to do that lookup. And I do that lookup and we get the IP addresses that Google will give me for this domain. Now, I have gone ahead and create a static DNS record on my own Badjr, and I can do one here as well. If I say add static DNS record and I say noodle.com with 1234, that is the IP address that I want the Badjr to respond with when getting a domain lookup. So I can save this. That will save now. I've already gone and done that on my Badjr. And if I do a lookup for that domain using the local DNS server, which is the Badjr in this case, it will come through with that address. And because that website already exists and I do this, this should not return anything because 1.2.3.4 does not exist. So I've effectively blocked that website on the local network because it can't resolve to the actual name. That domain now exists inside the Badjr and it's returning the 1234 address. Now in the same way, if we go back to my LAN page here, so LAN overview, in the same way, if I have a domain controller on site and I have a local domain, for instance, my company has a local domain, those users authenticate to that domain controller on that domain controller server, and that domain controller server has a Active Directory and a domain, it is the primary DNS server for the network. I need to consider that when installing the Badjr on site. And you won't see it here, but if you go into edit, you'll see here, is there a domain controller on site? It asks you that question. You say yes, and it will ask you what the local IP address is of the Windows domain controller and what the domain name is. If you enable these, that means that your Windows DC becomes the primary DNS server for your network. So when devices are doing DNS lookups, they're going to ask the local Windows domain controller first. If the Windows domain controller doesn't understand where that domain is, it's going to then forward it on to the Badjr, and henceforth the Badjr will then forward it on to whatever domain controller, whatever DNS servers it's using. So in this case, Google. So that's how your DNS will work for a Windows domain controller. And you are able to overwrite any DNS lookups on the local Badjr by adding in static DNS records if you wish. There is cases, in some cases, where a client will have a local domain controller and their local domain matches their public internet address. You will have to do a static DNS record bypass on the domain controller for the www record so that they can get to their website. And you'll be able to do that for the static DNS records as well. So you can bypass what DNS record will be returned by adding in a static DNS record. And that's that. Any questions, shoot it through in a comment, like and subscribe. We also have a Discord, which I'll link below, and get in touch if you want to know more. Thanks very much.